So there's a little bit of solid left, but it's not quite boiling, so I'm not going to add any more solvent yet. Yeah, the tryptamine oil all dissolved pretty quick. Probably added only a milliliter. So most of that solid is in, but not quite all of it. So it looks like I can probably add a little bit more solvent. This was already fairly powdery, so I didn't have to use the stir and run. Since that was just ethanol, I'll go ahead and put it back now that it's cooled off a little bit. Boiling stone can go down the sink. And since that only had solvent in it, we'll just let that dry in the back. Looks like I've probably added enough solvent. Doesn't want to boil. You can see there's a little faint yellow tint to the solution. That's probably the vanillin. Hopefully when the compound comes out it'll be nice and white. So since there's such a small volume, less than 5 milliliters, I'd rather switch it to a smaller flask. It'll be easier to handle. I'm going to go ahead and dump that in there. And you'll see that it started crystallizing immediately as it cooled. So now we're going to add a little bit more solvent just to get the last of the residue out of here. And I'm going to add a fresh boiling stone just so we get enough in there. Didn't lose any out of here, or at least not much. So I'm just letting that completely dissolve and come back to boiling, and then we'll cool that flask. And I don't think I'm going to have to add any more. I think there's plenty. So that's probably about 5 to 6 milliliters, maybe, probably closer to 5, I'd say, of the mixture. 4:1 aqueous ethanol. And it's a nice, very slightly colored, but very, very slightly solution. There's a little bit of solid up on the top I'd like to coax back down there. Just use the stirring rod for that. So that's boiling. It's hopefully a saturated solution. We're going to set that aside. And we want it to cool slowly. The slower it cools, the nicer the crystals. I'll dump a beaker upside down on it to let it cool a little slower. And we can turn that off. Let that cool. Eventually, once that's cooled, I'm going to cool that in the ice bath so that I can use that as my wash solvent after I've filtered the solid out. So, should be done with the hot plates, I hope. Just coil the cords up underneath so they don't contact the hot surface. Put those away. You can see it's already starting to crystallize, which is nice. Bring that over. It'll take a while to cool before I can put that in the ice bath. Meanwhile, the tryptamine is not crystallizing. Pretty freely soluble in that quantity of ethanol, but I haven't cooled it yet, so. I won't be needing this beaker anymore. So lots of solid forming in the E-cinnamic acid flask. That's pretty much at room temperature. So we'll cool it in the ice bath and see if we can get crystallization. Kind of important that it not fall over. And if it doesn't want to crystallize, I will also just kind of scratch the sides of the test tube a little bit, try to create a nucleating surface for it to crystallize on. It's a standard trick. Shouldn't take very long for this small volume to cool. Looks like we might be getting some solid. Somewhat promising. Get another little scratch. Definitely some crystals forming. You can see solid on the walls, and you can see it's also collecting in the tube. So as I don't have to hold that, I'll create an ice bath in a 50 ml beaker. That way I can set it aside and it won't fall over. And this is cool enough that I think I can get away with sinking that in there. Get a little water out first. So that'll be my cold ethanol wash, or my cold aqueous ethanol wash for when I filter that. I need a clamp, because I will want to clamp that filter flask so it doesn't fall over. So it's a very small volume. We're going to use our smallest size filter flask, which is 25 milliliters. Fits a number 3 rubber adapter. And hopefully these guys are clean. Looks good. And vacuum hose. Didn't use that one. And that one only had the ethanol in it. Just like that. Looks like we're done with the boiling stones. Still not quite at room temperature yet, so I don't want to cool it any further. If it cools too quickly, your crystals end up trapping some of the impurity. But I can turn on the vacuum here and get that seated nicely. And wet that with a little bit of this cold solvent. Just to create a nice seal. Probably won't be necessary to cool that one in an ice bath. We're getting nice crystals, but I do want to let it reach room temperature before I filter it. And this guy is crystallizing out nicely. We have the cold ethanol sitting over in the ice bath. So we'll have a separate filter assembly for that one. On this scale, this is really kind of too big of a funnel, but it's what we've got, so we're going to use it anyway. Yield's not going to be great on the tryptamine, but it was fairly pure to begin with. We just know that it should be white, not pale yellow, when it's clean. should be all I need out of that. And I still got the vanillin, which is a nice white solid. Got a little bit of cinnamic acid in it, but not so much as to matter. So while we're waiting for things to cool, we'll grab some labels. Since this is an aqueous solvent, it'll have to cool in a, or sorry, dry in the desiccator in a 10 ml beaker. So I'll label that TCA from 4:1 aqueous ethanol. Tape that label on, and then we'll weigh this beaker. It'll enable us to get 8% recovery. So the empty beaker for the tranexamic acid is looking like 8.113 grams. 8.113 grams for that, for the tranexamic acid beaker. And that will sit in the desiccator inside a 50 ml beaker, just like before. So it's ready when we need it. And then this will be the tryptamine from ethanol. You will, of course, assign lot numbers to these. And we'll also be sitting that in the desiccator to dry. Since ethanol always has a little